You're listening to Lanta, a Bittersweet MM Romance written by Tonkoi and read by me, Eddie Tonkoi. This is Chapter 1, part of a free 45-minute sample available now at jerntonkoi.com/free. The full audiobook will be available soon. Now, let's begin. January 1994. The sea breeze felt different on Lanta. Perhaps that difference came from the island's near equatorial position, so far from the familiar London climate I'd grown up with. Or perhaps it was simply because I was in a place thousands of miles from anything that felt like home. I can't exactly pinpoint the reason, but I know there was a heaviness to the breeze that both enthralled and unsettled me. When I was a boy, maybe 6 or 7, I used to run along the shingle beach at our summer house in Devon. My hair was still blonde back then, pale and soft, catching salt and spray until my mother had to endure the tedious process of rinsing out the tangles in the bath. I remember the smell of the sea and the wind in my curls, and I remember feeling a strange sense of freedom in that breeze. I'd race after it, arms stretched wide, laughing like an idiot. On warmer days, which were never actually that warm in Devon, I'd lie down on the pebbles and just let the wind sweep over me. It's odd, but I used to see colours in that breeze. Not literally rainbows floating in the air, mind you, but subtle hues that I associated with joy, warmth, or the promise of a new day. Each gust felt like a swirl of bright happiness. Time has a way of bleaching out those colours. I was freshly 25 when I stepped foot on Lanta for the first time, and my hair was no longer blonde. During my teenage years, it lost that bright lustre and faded into a nondescript brown. The sense of wonder I felt in the breeze faded right along with it. At some point, unnoticed at first, my world slowly turned into a more monochromatic, predictable place. And before I realised it, I seldom noticed anything remarkable about the wind, be it in London, Devon, or anywhere else. Yet here on Long Beach in the south of Thailand, with the moonlight on my face and the soft sand clinging to my calves, I could almost sense something different in the night air. It was heavy, yes, but not oppressive, more like a thick, silky presence that gently caressed my cheeks. There was a refreshing salt scent to it, a briny aroma that reminded me faintly of childhood happiness. It was sobering too, washing away the effects of the evening's overindulgence in alcohol. I could taste salt on my lips, or was it the bitterness of unshed tears? That sobering effect from the breeze made it all come rushing back to me, why I was there in the first place, sprawled in the sand with Michael drifting in and out of drunken consciousness, mumbling some nonsense against my shoulder. The reason we had come to the island started 2 weeks ago, at our New Year's gathering. My family, well-bred, upper-class British, old money with certain expectations, had thrown a rather lavish party. Close friends and relatives assembled, all exchanging polite wishes for a bright and beautiful new year. I'd heard that phrase so many times over the years, it had become background noise. Another swirl of champagne, another sparkly laugh, another round of caviar perched on tiny crackers. Yet as much as the tradition bored me, I tried to wear the correct expression of warm civility. My sister, Lila Rose Clarrington, 2 years my junior, was engaged to be married to Michael Spencer, a man who had been my friend since our Boy Scout days. Everyone was thrilled. I suppose it was indeed wonderful news. Lila was sweet, intelligent, and gentle. Michael was a charming, successful sort with a penchant for the occasional rowdy spree. For all that, I did care for them both. On the surface, it really was cause for celebration. Of course, we had to do something to mark Michael's final freedom before the wedding. A bachelor's holiday, he called it, a little tradition among some social circles. He insisted only the 2 of us should go. We'd have one last grand adventure as friends before he settled into conjugal bliss. The idea was tempting. Sunshine and sea breezes sounded glorious compared to the dreary January weather back in England. What I hadn't anticipated was the complicated swirl of emotions that would come with being alone in an exotic location with a man I'd secretly been in love with for a decade. I doubt Michael had ever realised it, or if he had, he'd chosen to ignore it. After all, we moved in the same circles, often spent nights drinking, sometimes waking up with me half carrying him back to his bed when he got too deep in his cups. If he suspected something, he never let on, and I never found the courage or the foolishness to tell him. Most nights on Lanta, Michael tried to prove that being engaged hadn't really dampened his appetite for women. I was the designated caretaker, I suppose. He'd chase after anything in a skirt, and once he'd had his fun, I'd retrieve his drunken carcass. That was how it typically went. I might have objected more vigorously if I hadn't been so accustomed to smoothing over Michael's indiscretions. After all, Lila had asked me to look after him, to ensure no scandal erupted and no hearts were broken. She trusted me. I trusted myself too, except for those painful moments when Michael said just enough to remind me how pathetically in love I was. As it turns out, that night was one such moment. I can still see the foolish grin on his face as he spouted out some absurd notion. He was well past drunk, and likely not in command of any genuine feelings. Still, it stung to hear those words as a joke, a meaningless bit of drunken fancy, when my heart had meant them for years. Earlier that evening, we'd stumbled along the beach, Michael and I, after a night of heavy drinking in a beachside bar. I was supporting most of his weight. He was half singing, half laughing, and occasionally burping out words that formed little sense. At one point, he slurred, "Lila, she's wonderful, you know." "Yes, mate, she's my sister. Of course she's wonderful," I replied, trying to keep him upright. "You're wonderful too, Lester, my boy." The casual endearment stabbed at me. I forced a polite, tight-lipped smile. "I appreciate the compliment. Now, could you possibly help me out a bit? You're half asleep on your feet." He blinked at me slowly. "She doesn't understand me. My fiancée, your sister. She doesn't get that I sometimes need more." "Michael," I chided, "you're being more than a bit unfair. If you're worried about your impulses, that's something for you and Lila to work out, not you and me. I'm not a miracle worker." He snorted out a laugh that turned into a hiccup. "She told you to keep an eye on me, didn't she?" "Well, maybe," I admitted. "She doesn't trust me. Or you. She's just—" "No, that's not it," I insisted, though I suspected Lila did have her worries. "She just wants to avoid any dramatic, tabloid-like fiasco." He flung an arm around my neck, pulling me closer so I could smell the stale whiskey on his breath. "We're on holiday, Lester. Let's live a little. If news gets out, well, it won't, will it? You understand me." I rolled my eyes. "I really don't, Michael." He paused, gaze drifting out over the water for a moment. Then out of nowhere he said, "I wish you were Lila. I'd marry you in a second. Then we could both go partying with girls. No questions asked. No guilt. That'd be a riot." "Christ, Michael," I muttered, cheeks heating in embarrassment. Anger even. "You're plastered. Let's get you back to the hotel. You can sleep it off." He swayed dangerously. "Marry me, Lester. I love you." For a single breath, my world stopped. Then my foot twisted in the sand. We crashed down together, Michael landing hard on top of me. He let out a roaring laugh, and like so many times before, I forced myself to laugh along, playing it off like another silly piece of banter. This was how I'd learned to keep my chest from caving in, and I became better at it as I got older. But tonight, the warm breeze of Lanta tightened around my throat. My laughter became shallow until it died in a strangled wheeze as the truth sank deeper. Once again, Michael's careless words rang hollow, reminding me that my feelings were nothing but a flimsy punchline to him. Heat pricked behind my eyes, turning into sharp, stinging tears. I couldn't tell if it was heartbreak, frustration, or just the liquor burning in my veins. But even as each tremor in my chest told me I couldn't shrug this off anymore, not when it was tearing me apart, all I could manage was a pent-up curse. Damn you! That night I tasted my own tears. It was the moment I realised how bitter a loneliness could be. Encounter with a stranger. I would have gotten up sooner, but Michael was pinning me down. His weight, combined with my own heartbreak, kept me there in the sand. I heard a rattling sound. At first, I thought it was some animal scurrying by, but then I noticed a fishing boat bobbing in the shallow water, only a few meters from the shore. I pushed myself up to a seated position. A figure sat dangling his legs on the small deck of the boat, watching us. He was hardly visible under the cover of the night, save for a red glint in his hand as he swigged down the last of his soft drink, then hopped off into the shallows. I saw him wade towards us, the moonlit water cascading around his legs. I should have been frightened, an unfamiliar man approaching on a dark, empty beach. But I was strangely calm. He wore only a pair of cotton shorts and a pale light shone on his deep brown, coppery skin. He was slender, but athletic, with toned muscles visible beneath the sheen of the water. As he came closer, he crouched beside me and peered at my face with what seemed like genuine concern. Moonlight washed over his face. A young man, younger than me by more than a few years. For one tense second, I expected him to scold us, or worse, since we must have disturbed his peace. But he simply reached out and touched my cheek, wiping a tear away with his thumb. To my surprise, I didn't shrink away. If I had stopped and thought, I would have recoiled in shame that a stranger had caught me crying my eyes out while clutching onto the man I couldn't have. But instead, my heartbeat thundered, and I felt something flutter in my chest. Fear? Excitement? Both, perhaps. Then he leaned in and pressed his lips softly to mine. I'd kissed people before, girls at school, fellow students at Oxford in fumbling moments of youthful experimentation. But never a man, never the man I longed for, and never a stranger who appeared out of nowhere smelling faintly of salt and diesel fumes. The gentle press of those lips felt entirely new. A thrill shot through me, overshadowing everything else in my mind, and it became clear it wasn't fear or excitement, it was liberation. In that moment on the beach, I was pardoned. I was given permission to fall apart over a man, and permission to be consoled by another. And just like that, the shame and fear ebbed away, leaving in their place a peaceful sense of empathy coming through the warmth of those lips. I took a while to gather myself before I noticed the stranger trembling slightly, as if scared of what he was doing. Perhaps, like me, he too had never kissed a man. The tremor made me bolder. I kissed him back, guided by instincts I'd only half acknowledged existed. My ego stirred. I wanted to show this kid how adults kiss. My hand slid to the nape of his neck, pulling him closer. I felt the coarse, wild hair against my fingertips, and I parted his lips just enough to dip my tongue inside. He made a small sound of surprise, half a moan, half a gasp. The sound buzzed through my veins. I wanted more. But Michael groaned beside us, shifting in the sand, snapping me back to reality with painful abruptness. With an awkward cough, The young man pulled away. I just sat there, paralysed at the thought that Michael might have seen us. But the taste of him lingering on my lips soothed me, a mingling of salt water and whatever sweet drink he'd been sipping. I watched him retreat to his boat, stepping through the shallows until the water swirled around his thighs. He climbed aboard, then turned back once, as if thinking he might come back to me again. But he didn't. He cast me a final glance, started the engine, and chugged away into the night. That was Chapter 1 of Lanta. If you'd like to continue listening, you can stream the rest of Part 1 or sign up to be notified when the full audiobook is released. Just visit journtonkoi.com/free. Thank you for listening.